In lesson 16, we are continuing with our discussion on the normal distribution, but this time we will be focusing on finding values. We have 3 objectives in this lesson. We want to be able to, and I'm just going to draw some quick pictures to explain these, but we want to be able to find the z-score given the area under the normal curve. So a quick example of that is if I tell you that the area right here is 0.4, what is this z-score? We already know how to do the problems if I tell you that this z-score is negative 1.2. We know how to take this z-score and go find the area. We can use a calculator, we can use StatCrunch, or we can use the tables. But today we'll be talking about, well, if I tell you the area, how do you go backwards and find the z-score? Our second objective is we will be transforming z-scores to x values. So we have already done problems back in lesson 15 where we translated x values. So what I mean by that is like an x, when I say an x value, I mean a data point. So a data point like 4 that represented how many hours a week he was working. This is an example from the lesson 15 presentation that we converted that x value to a z-score. And we found that x being 4 is equivalent to z being negative 2. So we know how to go from an x value to a z-score using this formula. What we will be talking about today in lesson 16 is how do we go from a z-score to an x value. And then finally, our third objective will be very similar to the first objective, but this time, instead of telling the z-score that gave us a probability, what was the x-score that gave us? What was the x value that gave us that probability? So there's this kind of relationship between x, z, and the probabilities. X is the raw data, the data that we're starting with. Z is the standard scores. And once we have the standard score, we can then go use the calculator or StatCrunch or the standard normal tables to find the probability. But you cannot get from x to probability without crossing over z and vice versa. So the things that we already know how to do is we know how to start with an x value and calculate the z value. We learned that in lesson 15. So I kind of spread these out a little bit because I'm going to show you what we already know this blue arrow. That is from lesson 15. And we do that using the formula that z is equal to x minus mu divided by sigma. That is how we start with an x value, and then calculate a z value. We also already know how to start with a z value and then find a probability. So what I mean by that is if I tell you what this z value is, you could tell me what this area is over here to the left. And we learned how to do that in lesson 14. And we have several ways that we could do that. We could do that using the standard normal table. We could do that using a calculator, or we could do that using StatCrunch. So we know how to go forward in this progression. This lesson is all about going backwards in this progression. So the objectives that we have is to find the z-score when we are given the area under the normal curve. Remember that the area under the normal curve is the same thing as the probability. So one of the objectives is to start with the probability and to go and find the z-score. That's something new that we will learn how to do in lesson 16. Another thing that we will learn how to do in lesson 16 is how to start with a z-score and transform it to an x value. That's something new also that we will learn in this lesson. Another thing that we will learn in this lesson, the final thing that we will learn in this lesson, is calculate a data point of a normal distribution given the probability. So that last objective 16.3 is starting with the probability, going backwards to find the z-score, and then going backwards to find the x value. That is the third objective that we will talk about in lesson 16. So we're first going to break it up into 2 steps. What's in orange? How do we find the probability? How do we start with the probability and find the z-score? Then what's in green? How do we start with the z-score and find the x value that it came from the raw data? And then we're going to combine those 2 processes to go from probability to z-score to x-score. That is what those bottom 3 arrows, green, orange, and red on the bottom, are what we will be talking about in this lesson.